You're good.
We're live?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. We're just doing our final marketing post here so that people can join in. And today should be a fun one. This is one that I was recently asked about on a personal Facebook question, and I felt it was important enough where I wanted to do a whole stream on it. So let me just test out the links here, make sure giving the right link out. Okay. We're good. All right. So you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CG Cookie live stream. I'm Tim Von Rieden, joined with the moderator, Joe Chico.
Hello.
And today we are going to be talking about Character Design 101. And as I go through this live stream, just with all of our live streams, if you have any questions, even if they don't pertain to what I'm working on, feel free to ask them, and Joe will sort through them and ask me them, and one of us will give you our best answer. And this one specifically, like I mentioned earlier, was from a question. I guess, I won't say her name, but she just wanted to know the basis on how to create a character that seems more than just bland or more than generic. And this is a question that I really enjoyed because I wrote back like a 3-paragraph message on what I believe makes characters more diverse, more deep, and they actually feel like a real person. And I think that that definitely comes into play when you're doing character design as a character artist, that you need to see these characters that you're creating as real people, and it will deepen the understanding of that character, and then that will play into what will that character be wearing, or what will that character's weapon be, because it's based on their personality and who they are and the environment that they live in or how they grew up. All these questions that you want to be asking yourself when you create the character. Okay, so the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to have, let me make a new file here really quick. We're just going to do some like simple sketches of what I would do for a character that, well, actually I'll go through it as I create them, but let me go ahead and minimize some of these other ones. All right, I'm ready to switch over. Joe, are you ready to ask some questions?
Yep.
Or do the first opening of where everyone's from?
We got someone from Wales. And that's the only person that's been like, hey, from somewhere.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. If you, we always like to begin the stream with a quick shout out for anyone that is watching and where you are located, where you're watching it, and we'll do a quick shout out to you guys.
All right, I'll start off with this question. This is a good question. Are you growing a beard? From Tom Diamond.
Yeah, I've actually never shaved my entire life, so this is the first time that someone's noticed that I can actually grow facial hair.
Wait, you've never shaved before?
No, I'm just kidding.
It's like, what?
April Fools.
That was last week.
But it kind of goes back to the idea that I go to movie theaters and sometimes I still get carded. And it's like, really? Like, I'm 25.
What you should do is you should just wear fake beards. Like really long old man beards.
Old man beards.
Old man beards. Let's see. Aaron Huggins says hello from Stafford in England.
Hello.
Cheerio. Hi from Germany. Moscow, Florida, the Netherlands. Chocolate greetings from Switzerland. Jay.
Quick greetings.
Chocolate greetings. The Acid Demon. His real name is Jay.
That sounds sweet.
Which is actually one of my favorite names when it's not just the letter J, but it's spelled out J-A-Y. It's a cool name. Hello from Belgium. Cisco Punch 67 says, hey Tim and Joe and everybody. And Micah says, hey Tim.
Hello, everyone.
Hello! Welcome to this portion of the internet.
Alright, so I'm going to start off with what are some basic character design 101 principles? Alright, so whether you're working at a job or you're doing this for personal stories or personal whatever that you're working on, you have to think about your character. And you might be given the idea of make a cool character, or make a badass character, or make a sweet or cute character. Now, these are so bland that these generic terms I don't want you to stick with and run with. I need you to dig deeper than surface level adjectives. So let's look at, first we're going to look at badass. Okay, so there are things that imply badass about a character, and sometimes it's subjective, but for the most part, there's like a realm of, that's a badass character if they're tough looking, if they have a weapon that's really cool, things that are very familiar to the viewer, because you're not only trying to make it look badass for yourself, but you want others to perceive the character as badass. So, the first thing I want you to do is think, okay, well, is it going to be a female or a male? And then we can build off of that. So if it's a male character, I'll do this one here. I'm going to make a new layer above that. All right, so what are the points I'm trying to make with this character? So he has to look strong. And now, mind you, not all of the what I'm going to write here pertain, like they have to be included in this list, but these are just general adjectives that definitely describe a badass. They need to look serious. Let's see here. What's another? Joe, give me a badass trait.
Badass trait? That's a physical description, because I would just say Batman voice.
You think Batman voice is pretty badass?
I think deep voice is like Rorschach. Very badass. Coats are pretty badass. Like
All right,
trench
so that's
coats.
definitely more on like the physical. Yeah.
Um,
Coats.
belts. Belts are pretty badass. um,
Lulu. I always think Lulu when I think belts.
the problem is I just watched a bunch of playthroughs of Bloodborne, and those characters are very, very awesome. The character design in that is like so good.
I've seen those. Yeah, I like them.
Um,
All right. Well, regardless, when you're listing out the different traits for your character, so these are the more general thoughts on the character. So now we want to make it more specific. So now you have to think about, okay, what world is this character living in? What environment is this character living in? Because that'll affect his wardrobe, his personality, and his mentality. Because let's say there's a big difference between a badass that's located in the desert versus a badass that's located in a swampy area. And their clothing is going to reflect that. But it's still going to pertain to that tough or strong look, because they're not going to pick out things that look more sensitive or give off the perception of a weak person. So they want to keep up that that look, that image. So from there, I usually like to think of, okay, this is where the character, that's the world that they're placed in. Now I want to think about the character themselves, their personality. Because not all badass characters have to be like mean or silent or emo sometimes. There are some badass characters that are verbally strong or intelligent, or I'm trying to think off the top of my head, even villains come across as badass, and it's because of their maniacal nature, the way they scheme, the actions that they do, or even the way they look at others, sometimes more as like pawns rather than actual people. So, when designing your character, I want you to think more than just the coding of the character. So go deeper than the surface level. Actually, I don't know if I want to. I kind of want to do a badass female more than I want to do a badass male. I'm gonna change this. female badass. All right. So when I'm designing the character, considering that this is more of a concept art over an illustration, so I'm going to give it more of a basic pose. But even a basic pose can read with an attitude or a personality while still showing off the entire body and the clothing and the different articles of clothing that they're wearing based on the confidence that is seen in the pose itself, the way they carry themselves, and even with just a simple pose, like if they're arched forward, might give off more of a shy appearance, where if they're leaned back and their chest is more out, definitely gives more of a confident vibe to it. And I guess as I'm doing some initial sketches here, I'll go ahead and answer some of the questions we got going on.
All right. Do you want just questions, or do you want like drawing questions that you'll probably have to draw them to explain?
First, give me the general ones.
Okay. I am not asks. I mostly draw fan art and hope to build somewhat of a fan base. Would you say that can be a setback in one's own creative talent? For example, coming up with your own characters.
This is something that we've been actually heavily talking about in like the last month or two, just because of all the conventions that me and my friends go to sell our work. There's been a lot of, I guess, frustration in the idea that only fan art sells at conventions, and it pushes artists to do more fan art, I would say. So, do I believe fan art definitely builds a fan base faster? Yes. Just because with a familiar subject matter, the viewer can relate to it, and they'll like it, and they'll follow you, sort of in hopes that you'll create more of that, but also because they like your style or the way that you interpreted it. So your goal is to bring in fans through fan art, but then slowly transition into doing original art. Now, mind you, this is just a general look at it. There's different ways that you can go about doing it. I have one friend that only does original work, and he's always done original work, and he's been fine in terms of people not only buying from him, but having a following and being proud of the fact that he made it off original work. Now, mind you, he won't make as much money as people doing fan art most of the time because that's what people want. Or even following. People love fan art. Like, look at Saki Mi-chan. She's still pumping out a bunch of fan art, and people love it. They eat it up because it's a style that is really well rendered mixed with a subject matter that they are familiar with. So it's like they're getting the best of both worlds. But I do agree that in a way it is a setback for, like what you said, for your creative talent, because then you're relying on other properties or other people's ideas to become noticed. And starting off, I think it's fine. But once you're self-aware enough to a point where you're like, I think I do have enough of a following now where I can create my own work, and I want to be recognized for that. And yeah, it's kind of a scary transition because there will be people that will unfollow you and won't like your original stuff because they came to see more of that fan art. But that's a chance that I really do believe you have to take in order to become a recognized artist down the line. And if you only rely on fan art, then you're really limiting yourself as an artist in how capable you could have been or like all the time that you're putting into the fan art stuff, then at that point could have been put into doing your original work. And I feel like then you would have lost a lot of that time. And it's sometimes sad with artists that I follow when I know they're good enough, and I know that they know they're good enough, and I want to see their original work. Their original work gets me really excited. Like even James Zapata, his Moon and Crow story that he dabbles on and off with. I love every new thing that he posts on that, but I always see that his fan art stuff always gets more likes or whatever, and I just hope that doesn't discourage him from doing his original story, but rather I don't know. I guess I need to be more vocal about when I like the original stuff, and the people that like his original stuff need to make it known, because sometimes as an artist, we put this personal pressure on ourselves to create work that sometimes falls under the category of appealing to other people rather than appealing to you as an artist. And I think there needs to be a mix between the two.
Yeah,
Sorry, that was a really long answer, but that
No,
question.
it was good. Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that like there needs to be a mix. Because if it's like if you're just doing your own work, then it's gonna be really tough to get recognition, and then but eventually you might get it. You might get it, and but at the same time, just doing fan art though is you're not doing your own IP. But I guess if you're just like an artist who wants to work at a company, like that's all you want to do is be a concept artist, then then it makes sense that you would just do fan art because you're essentially just taking rehashes of other people's designs and making them quote unquote better, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely that tough line of what kind of an artist. I guess that's what it comes down to. What kind of an artist do you want to be recognized as?
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of important to hit on the nose that there isn't a good or bad artist in the sense of like, because if you're working for a company like say Zeronis, right? He
Yeah.
does amazing work. He's really good, and but he's still a really good artist. But but a lot of his stuff is just based off of League.
Well, for his work. But like
Yeah,
Patreon and stuff, it's all either original stuff or fan art.
but he doesn't have uh, an IP or anything, right? Like he doesn't.
Yeah, no, he does.
What's his
All of
IP?
his like mech girls or whatever. Again,
Oh,
I
really?
love seeing them. Yeah, like those are all of his original ideas.
Huh.
Yeah. So like I appreciate that he takes the time like outside of work stuff to create his own original stuff. And I know that he knows he's good enough where he doesn't have to do any more fan art pieces. But I think it does generate more buzz when he creates like he just did a Majora's Mask one and people loved it and like it was really well rendered. And I think he fell back on the fan art one on that one specifically over just doing another mech girl or on an original piece.
Yeah. There's pros and cons to all forms of art.
Hmm.
All right, this one has plus 16 votes. I have to ask it. I think it's the highest it's ever been.
That scares me.
For a question. It says, "Hello, my question is how do I draw small characters where the head is bigger in proportion than usual without making them look like a regular sized character with just a giant head? For example, a character that measures 3 to 4 heads in total."
So where do I? Hold on. I have to reread that one. How do I draw a smaller character with a head of the bear? Um. Okay.
That's,
I'm assuming they don't want it to look chibi either.
yeah, I'm guessing they just need to understand scale.
Yeah, I guess that one's a little rough because you might be going more into like a stylized direction. So like, let's say, let me draw my little big head character here. Because when you start to exaggerate proportions, you definitely pull into the realm of uh, it's not realism, but you can still give the impression of it looking in proportion. But you have to be careful that it makes sense. Let me see if I can do a quick little proportion. All right, so say this was your character. So this head is much larger than it should be, where a normal head might be like this, depending on the actual size relation to the environment around it. But man, that's tough.
Do they mean like
Because, or what?
do they mean like drawing like a dwarf?
That's what I was about to ask without trying to sound offensive.
No, that's
Because
not.
then I think if you're trying to draw like let's say Tyrion from Game of Thrones, you just have to look at his proportions and you'll see how everything's in proportion with each other, but it doesn't look chibi. And there's a fine balance. And actually, I don't really want to draw Tyrion on the side here, with my poor interpretation of a 2-minute drawing of Tyrion. But just look at how all of his limbs and his anatomy and proportions make sense, and it doesn't look cartoony. And I think just using reference and really studying how the different features kind of line up would be the best way to go about doing it.
Yeah, and I was also gonna say like just the fact that that character is sitting next to that girl, because you have they have that understanding of scale, like automatically makes that character smaller.
Yeah, that too.
Like that's huge.
That is huge.
Pun not intended. Or watch The Hobbit. Just watch The Hobbit a lot. Or Lord of the Rings. Okay, we're gonna hit one of Benedict's 50 questions.
Thank you, Benedict.
No, it's good. We like that you ask questions because that means that we can answer questions, you know?
Yeah,
Left no stone unturned, is that the phrase?
sure.
Egg and chicken question. What has to come first, the character concept or the backstory?
It doesn't matter. So let me think of how I can explain that. Okay, so a few weeks ago, I was trying to do more development on my red character, and I decided that she was going to have older brothers, 3 of them, and it made sense with her story and the way that I was going to write her backstory. So immediately, okay, I have 3 characters that I need to design. Actually, hold on, this might be kind of a fun one. All right, so there are 3 pretty much male characters that I need to design, and they're older brothers. So immediately, I'm pulling from my knowledge of what a brother means. I'm looking at the pop culture and their perception of what older brothers stand for, and I'm looking at all the memory banks I have of movies or games or whatever that I've seen with brothers or stories or books, whatever, and how they interpreted older brother character, not only characters but their personalities. So then we have the oldest. Or here, let me do it like this. The oldest, the second oldest, and the third, and then red is last. So she's a little baby girl at this point. All right, so the first one, the oldest brother, what are the base things that come to mind when you think oldest brother? Without even having to say them out loud, you think, okay, well, they're probably protective. They probably look out for the younger siblings. They might be a bit wiser than the other ones, or they might just be the strongest. So the one that I went with was he was the strongest, and he's definitely the protector, and he kind of took on that personality where he is like the father, very much similar to the father. So that was the first brother. Now the second one, you can play with a few different ideas because the youngest brother you can put more into like the baby category, the baby of the family. The second one, and usually there's some stigma with the middle child, and in this case, I wanted to give the appearance of a rebellious kid because I think that's the vision you see of the second child, but I wanted him to be so closely related to the family and he had such a respect for the family members he had that only his outer appearance would appear rebellious, but his true nature was actually very kind-hearted and very much family-oriented. But I wanted him to be seen more as like the cool brother, and that was the perception I wanted to give him. Now the third brother, the youngest, so the youngest brother, and from personal experience, being the baby of the family did kind of rock. It was one of those things where you got away with a few more things, your parents weren't as strict on you. So in this one, I wanted to be a bit more free, a little more wild. So even with his hair, I gave him like this unruly set of locks that he is very proud of. I had him like wearing overalls, just very simple-minded and just adventurous and carefree. So those were the 3 traits or 3 brothers that I created, and then Red was my last one. And Red's my character where she's definitely a tomboy, and it's very much influenced because she has 3 older brothers, and that definitely reflects in her personality. So now even as I was thinking up the Red character, I had to think about, okay, well, she's seen as a tomboy. I wanted her to give the impression of like a fighter, someone that might be jumps before they looks kind of a thing. And if it doesn't come across in the design of the character, then it doesn't read well enough. Okay, so that was my little tangent on that. But to answer the question, in this case, the backstory came first because I knew I needed 3 other brothers, and then I created the character concepts based on that. But usually it goes hand in hand. So when you think of a character, you're about to create a character, usually think of the different traits, and then as you start thinking of the traits, the backstory starts to come in mind, and then you think about all the other things that we've been talking about, and that's how you create the character.
Brianna asks, "Hey guys, do you have any tips on how to make characters distinguishable? I feel like my characters don't really stand out as far as design and appearance."
Yeah, absolutely. I think this almost comes even stronger into the idea that you have to pull from your personal experiences, because that's what will kind of set apart what makes your character different from, let's say, your colleague's character or your fellow worker, or even if you're doing it on your own, it'll look different than all of the other characters out there that are similar to yours. Now, let's say you wanted to create, let me think here off the top of my head. I guess we'll just say a standard hero character. I want you to pull your own experiences and your own personality traits and what you enjoy into that character, but I don't want it to become overwhelming, because sometimes when you put only what you like on a character, it almost isolates the character because it might not even feel accurate, because then you're not taking into account what that character's personality might be. So if that character's personality is more outgoing or extroverted, where you as the artist might be more introverted and quiet, some of the things that you're adding to the character might not really apply to what that character actually, or who that character actually is. So sometimes you have to think outside of yourself, really pull from I really like to pull from pop culture, and I see singers and celebrities, and I see how their perception of them is very heavily based on what they're wearing and how they act, not so much them as a person. So what you're adding onto the character, you have to be very conscious of what is this saying about the character themselves. So to make them more distinguishable, add your personality traits, but then also add what you enjoy alongside what you think that character would enjoy, if that makes sense. Because the more life that you give to the character, the more real he or she feels, the more real the viewer will see the character as well.
Ben Sinclair asks, "Is it better to do more fundamental studies or develop more of a creativity and original idea?"
Um, I think as a teacher, I would say the fundamentals, but as someone that didn't really do fundamental studies that much, I would say do your original ideas. But I think there's a fine balance that you need to do for both. So, like, I guess if you want to become better with characters, obviously, I think you need to do some anatomy studies. I think you'd be fooling yourself to think that you don't have to do any anatomy studies and you'll be fine, because it plays such a large role into character design in general that to skip that, it just doesn't make sense. So I would say a mix of both. That would be my short answer.
Oh, I actually really like this question. From Mike, how do you go about giving your character superpowers like in an anime?
um, be honest, I've never actually had that many characters with original powers recently, but as a kid, I definitely had a whole story called Elementals, and all of them had superpowers. All right, so now how do I go about doing that? Well, one, you're gonna be influenced from what you already know. So obviously, I was really big into X-Men at the time, so the superpowers that me and my friends pretended we had, and when we went outside to play, whatever, it definitely derived from X-Men and the superpowers they had. So if you want to be more original, you definitely have to step outside of the box and really think about like what would be a cool power that I haven't really seen before. But I need you to make sure that the character's power kind of makes sense for who the character has become. I think like let's see, the Avatar series has done like the best job of having the personality traits match their powers, and I think that would be a good example to use for yourself if you're trying to create characters with superpowers. I'm sure Joe, you have something you want to say about this one.
Um, yeah, I mean, what you said there was a really good point. You definitely don't want to make a character that right out of the bill just all of a sudden is like Superman, because that's super boring. Like to
Yeah.
give your character like all these superpowers, um, and then like just be able to like instantly kill people, like that's so lame. That's like what 13-year-olds used to do, or you know.
Hmm.
But also it also depends on what realm you're in too. There's I mean there's encyclopedias of just superpowers. That's the hard part is being coming up with your own original power and without it already being done because there's just lists and lists and lists of superpowers that are done. I think it's what's more important is if you can take a power and then make the character more interesting. So right now I'm playing with this idea of a character that's like death, and there's the power of I think it's from Naruto where this guy can travel through shadows. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I didn't watch that much of Naruto.
Or he can like control shadow or something. But the idea is that um, death is he's a really powerful being, but I don't want to overplay that in his character design because if I overplay that, then it becomes very boring. So I want the character Death to be very held back, like he withholds a lot of his power. And but the reason why I bring up the shadow thing is because that's how he maneuvers. He travels through shadows very easily. Um, and so it's stuff like that where I don't want to make him so overpowered where it's like, oh, he's death. You know, he can pretty much do anything he wants and then just kill anyone because he's death. But at the same time, I don't want my character to be the guy killing people because he's more of the Grim Reaper. So when people die, that's who they see. People don't fight this guy. Does that make? I guess that makes the character more interesting, right?
You ever see Soul Eater?
Uh, I think I watched like an episode.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, never mind. That's pretty much. I should have you watch Soul Eater because that's very similar to the Grim Reaper in Soul Eater.
Well, looks like I'm gonna have to do something different with that then. Jeez, it's so difficult because it's just like everyone's already done everything, right?
Hmm.
But I guess
Did
that's
you ever watch Misfits?
no.
That was a show about superpowers of ones that you haven't really seen before. So like one guy had the power to control the properties in milk. There was another one who, whenever she touched someone, would be sexually like engaged with her to the point of being like obsessed. So that was a weird. It was like they were given powers based on their personalities, and she was a more, I'll say, outgoing female, and that's the power that she was given. And then there was like every person was given a power that related to them. And like there was another person that when you touched someone, they could only speak the truth to you. Like it was just really interesting powers, and I think sometimes that's more intriguing than what we already know.
Yeah. The other idea though is to try to put things together, like to make stories interact with one another too. Try to make superpowers kind of combo off of one another.
That too.
That's a very cool idea. Because I mean, now you literally can't make an elemental story where like people can't control earth, wind, fire, air,
Hmm.
because then people think, you know, Captain Planet, right?
Or Avatar.
I know. I was just kidding.
Oh, I was gonna say, wrong generation.
Right? No, 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 no. Yeah, you can't do that without people being like, "That's Avatar."
Hmm. It's true though.
That's my rant on superpowers. Another question from Benedict. It says, "How important is getting down an interesting form and unique trades for a good concept, and how can you reinvent overused old concepts? Is it even necessary?" So I guess this kind of continues of what we were just talking about.
I feel like we're gonna have a lot of repeat stuff, but for this one, unique trades. I'm assuming that means job.
Yeah.
Wait. Okay, yeah, this definitely goes back to the idea that everything's been done before. So I think once you are okay with the fact that you might be repeating a lot of what has already been done, but you have to be confident in the fact that no one's used the concept from your perspective. So you have to pull what has influenced you throughout your life and your own unique take on it to spin what might be an older concept into a new idea. So essentially, you're reusing a lot of the the foundation for your story, but the way you build up the house, or the way you color the house, or the things that you have inside, should be different enough where you kind of separate the two.
Ooh, I like that. I think I'm gonna take that from you.
Oh, don't.
Don't
My
do
words.
it. That's my life's work.
Because I definitely see that. Like when I was in high school and stuff, I definitely almost even knew that a lot of what I was drawing was just taken from what I was influenced from. And you definitely see that like as a kid when you draw. Like I loved Digimon and Pokemon growing up, so I created Zigimon and I drew like 100 of them, and they were my own unique. I say that in air quotes. Interpretations, but really, essentially, they were just pulling from different traits that I liked about the different creatures or different Pokemon or Digimon, and I was fusing them into making my Frankenstein version of it. But it was very obvious, like that's what I was influenced from. But now looking back, they probably looked way too close to the actual reference material. But if I had to, if like that was my next task for CG Cookie was like creating a Pokemon game, I would try to obviously be influenced from it, but I would take what I've learned over the career of my art career and put a spin on it that would separate it enough where they would stand on its own, kind of a thing.
So, speaking of that, I found a sketchbook the other day from like 14 years ago, and the first picture in it is a Mandalorian holding a lightsaber, wearing like a Jedi cloak. So it was like yeah, I was totally into Star Wars, so all I was drawing was like lightsaber designs and all of these like characters that have already been done, but just like my versions of them.
The only problem is if you're still doing that and you don't see the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's or the best was the Dragon Ball Z characters.
Oh gosh.
Those are fantastic. Where everyone's wearing a jacket because Trunks was the coolest thing ever to happen.
I like the villains of DBZ. Give me Fat Boo and Perfect Cell.
Oh man, Boo is like my favorite.
Yeah, I love Boo. All right, now you can give me a drawing one. I'm ready.
Uh, Lily asks, how can you pose a character in a way that really shows off who they are, like something that really shows off their personality? So I'm guessing they just want a really dynamic, uh, like character.
How do you pose when it really shows? Okay, there. Oh, okay.
Could you do a sneaky character?
A sneaky one?
Very
Yeah.
sneaky, very snake-like,
So when I think sneaky, I think of like,
hunched over.
yeah,
Yeah.
fingers, like Mr. Burnsing right here. So if you want to exaggerate things, like for sneaky characters, I'm definitely pulling from like the obvious choices, which is fine because that works and it definitely reads and people will hopefully understand what you're trying to say. Um, I think the challenge is to try to invoke a personality trait that might not be so obvious. So something like a character that feels broken on the inside but exudes confidence on the outside. Now that is something that, how do you display that? So sometimes it might be in the way that they smile. They might have like the Mona Lisa smile. It could be in the way that they're standing. And it's funny how much we read into or like into the subtleties of a character, and then we define them based on those subtleties. So if someone was, there's a huge difference then, like let's say a character had, if you don't know what this is like the nose. So that kind of a smile versus let's say then like a half smile, and then a character that was like full on smiling, and then the ones that are like even with their teeth and their mouth like wide open. Like just a simple thing of like the way their mouth is shaped and the expression that they're giving off can say so much about the character. So I guess when you're creating the characters that you want to show off a personality trait, don't like overwhelm the viewer with like if it was a sad character, you don't want to like just put a bunch of mopey stuff on them and like dressed in all black and put heavy eyeliner or whatever the stereotypes might be associated with that. Rather, really give off a character, um, or rather give off the subtle traits of what sadness is and how that is seen in people, where it might be just like slightly hunched over or just a smile that feels ingenuine, like it doesn't feel real. And those are the traits that really show off a personality without having to resort to what's expected.
The This is a bit off topic. It's about the little tiny expressions that you're talking about. There's a book. I don't. Do you know anything about micro expressions?
Yeah.
It's I was reading a book on it, and then there was a show. Didn't they make a show that was like called like Lie to Me or something like that?
I have no idea.
And it was the whole science behind someone's immediate reaction to something that you say, and then you can like pinpoint the most like there's like numbers like on the face, or if like they like crack a little tiny smile, it like means that the person's thinking a certain thing.
Oh,
It's crazy.
that's kind of fun.
Why do experienced artists still start with grayscale sometimes? Is there something specific about this method that you makes for better results? If you have the knowledge to work directly in color, why lengthen the process?
um, I wouldn't say it lengthens it. Actually, there's some grayscale artists that work even faster because they don't start in color. They're able to see the values a lot more clear, and then their process of adding color on top is actually quicker than what you might expect. Where like artists like myself that you start straight in color, sometimes they dabble too much with color theory and like figuring out what colors look well against other colors, and they're not focusing on the values. I definitely dabble in that where sometimes my values are just slightly off because I'm not focused on the values as much. And why an experienced artist would stay in grayscale is so that they can stay focused on what is important, which are the values. And hopefully they have a solid enough understanding of color that when they go to add color, it wouldn't be as time consuming as you might think it might be, and they will just add it with a few layers and then doing some adjustments to it.
When creating a character, do you want to base their traits and personalities on what you think will sell, or are you better off going with personal preferences and hope people will relate? From Ryan.
Okay. When you say what will sell, I'm assuming what will the readability of the character, or if it's purely to like sell the concept to a viewer, I definitely never think that's the way to go, unless if you're trying to make money specifically. But I forgot which artist told me, but they told me if you're specifically doing art to make money, that's not going to make you happy in the long run because money does not equate into happiness. And I know this is kind of like an old, yeah, recycled saying, me even saying that, but it's very true. Even as I'm working on like con work, I notice that I'm definitely more happy and I feel so much more pride in selling an original work versus a fan art piece. All right, but to answer your question, I think you need to look at not only what is your personal preference, but also what makes sense with the character, kind of like what we were talking about. So if you wanted to make a, let's say, a streetwalker female, and she's very outgoing and presumptuous, then you can't just put what you would want on that character. You also have to put what that character would be wearing realistically in that setting. And I mean, there's so many factors you have to take into account, but you can't just go purely based on your personal preference, because if everything was just what you wanted, then you might be isolating yourself because you're not marketing to a wider range of different concepts. You're limiting it to your personal bubble. And I think when you start to not only be influenced from your personal bubble of influence, but you start to look at other people's influences and kind of take pieces here and there from it, that's when you start to create characters that are more broad or more, I want to say, widely acceptable in terms of not their sellability, but in how real that character feels.
Aaron Huggins asks, I have trouble giving my character weight. Do you have any advice or demo on how to do this? Thanks.
Yeah. Um, Usually the weight is very, like when I hear that, I'm assuming you mean like the physical girth of the character. But I think you also have to think of the weight of the articles of clothing that you're putting on them. So I guess how can I do this really quickly? All right, I'm gonna hide the teddy guy for a second. So when you're adding weight to a character, you got to break it down into simple shapes. So if you're doing a heavy set, say a male character, definitely working with the different shape knowledge that you have on how when weight is added to a character, when the thickness of skin, fat, whatever it might be, how it's added proportionally to the body is a good way to start. And it wouldn't make sense if I had a very, very thin neck up here. Like I want it to feel proportionate of the proportions that I've been adding here. So my biggest advice with keeping character weight in check is to keep it proportionate to the entire body. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about with the weight is the things that you're adding to the characters. It really bothers me when it feels like the clothes are like floating on the character, like the character doesn't seem to be wearing them. It seems just like it was added on top and it doesn't really fit or doesn't form or conform around the character or their anatomy whatsoever. So when you think of weight, I also want you to think of like, okay, let's say this character was wearing a shirt and it actually fit around the entire belly here. You probably get some pretty intense tension lines here to indicate that the fabric is being pulled outward in the front. You might even have some lines on the front, and that gives the fabric itself some believability. And now let's say the pant. Well, I don't want to get too much into this character, but the pant itself would have some definite stress lines. Then also giving the actual weight of the skin, so the character itself, the folding on the clothes might be represented by the underlying structure, which depending on how big and how thick this guy's legs were, you can imagine there might be some folds that are deep inset because of the way the character is wearing the clothes. Now, usually it's with things like that are actually heavy, so if like a character is holding like a bazooka or a sniper rifle or whatever it might be, like making it look like the character is putting some effort into holding it, because otherwise it looks like, oh, the cannon doesn't weigh anything, and it doesn't really read. It throws me off, at least, whenever I see something like that.
It reminds me of the concept from Dark Souls, the Ornstein and I think his name is Small. I forget what it is, but like it's like a huge freaking dude with like armor, but you don't never see what he looks like underneath. But he just looks huge, and he looks like he has a ton of weight, and he's got a huge hammer. Oh
Yeah.
man, such a good concept. Okay, I am going to the bottom.
Ready.
What about color choices? Is there anything that just doesn't look good? How about color combinations, hue, saturation, etc.?
It just doesn't look good. Oh boy. Man, I feel like I could give an entire lecture about color and what I personally believe doesn't look good, because a lot of color stuff is subjective, but there are some things where I'm like, I feel like this is widely accepted as not good. Uh, there are some colors that are isolating. The ones that I think of that pop to my mind right away are like, let me pull them up here. New layer. Like a color that's this intense, this vibrant, is very off-putting, especially when used as a majority color. And there's a few that just like even through school we'd always joke about. This color. See if I can find another one that never really seems to work. Or even ones that are more desaturated. So like ones that might appear more muddy, more poopy looking.
Baby food green.
Yeah. So like these color combinations, depending on how, it's all about how you use them though. Like you could definitely make this yellow or this seafoam green tealish color work, or even the muddy brown color. It's all about on the relation of colors you have near them and the impression that that color is giving off, the mood that it's evoking. So I don't want to say that there's like colors that like do like absolutely avoid, but there are definitely ones that majority of the time you see used wrong. So I would say uh, if you're going to use a isolating color like bright neon yellow, make sure you use it maybe, or try using it more isolated, more casually. Don't let it run the entire piece, because then it becomes a distraction. But I guess just in general with using saturation, let me pull up, because I think the best way to do this, if I have an example. All right, so on the red picture, let me merge all these together. Let's say I decided to make the saturations more intense. You can see how this becomes more off-putting than if it was desaturated. Now, this is the original picture. You can see how the desaturated one doesn't feel like color burn. It's almost more soothing to look at because it's not as intense. But when you go higher on saturation, that's when it becomes more of an eyesore and it's distracting. So the rule of thumb for me when using saturations is try working more desaturated and then having pockets of isolate or of saturation where you want the viewer to be looking, and avoid oversaturating your picture unless if you really know how to work it. Like artists like Purple Kakleon or Loesch, like I feel like they have such an understanding of color that they're able to utilize such vibrant saturated colors because they do it in a way that isn't distracting. If anything, it actually helps the piece. But just know, working with color definitely takes some time and practice, so I don't want you to get discouraged if it doesn't seem to work right away.
Chris Poncho wants to know how many weeks into pregnancy was that last character?
Well, considering it was a guy, 0.
Oh, good question from Serenity Moonshadow. It says, greetings from Germany. How long do you do research for themes? Example, medieval, steampunk, gothic, before you start drawing? And do you use reference of those themes for all your drawings, or just the beginning until you internalize the setting?
Okay, let me show you guys, because I actually think finding references is so important that I need to find, where do I keep all my reference folder? I just cleaned up my desktop, and of course I thought it would be easier for me to find things. Oh, there we go, okay. Because your references play a huge part into how it influences your current work. So let me pull up a few of my reference boards. So usually I use like Pinterest or my saves on DeviantArt. But like when I'm specifically working on something, so like this is my chibi board, and I have a whole bunch of layers that you can't see right now because they're hidden with the new stuff on top. But it might be something like the proportions, the way that they angled the eyes, the way that they colored different areas of the fabric. There are certain things that you can pick up from really quickly by having a reference board on the side. Let me pull up another one. So this one was when I was doing my Kelly character, and it was a lot of night stuff. I'm not as familiar with that, so I definitely have to do my research. I'm very heavily inspired by the way Akihisa does his styles, and almost all the designs in Final Fantasy XII I think are amazing in the way that they are symmetrical, but they are not like I won't say like shoved down your throat medieval. It almost feels modern, but still like you can feel the reference of medieval in it. So I really like that. And let me find one more for you guys. Then even actually two more. So when I was doing my red character, I'm not familiar with environments, and I think it's something that I'm very aware of is that I don't feel as strong doing environment art. So finding references and looking at like how rocks crack and how they're lit from different angles and how the subtleties of the texture might be seen on top of it. Having references like that is a great way to quickly look at it and adjust your own piece. And here's another one I have on skin, just a whole bunch of them. So like I find it so important to find reference for what you're working on because it's almost arrogant to think I can do it without reference, because then you're pretty much saying I don't need any help at all. I don't need any influences or any references or any past artists or masters that really understand how to use skin colors. I don't need them. I can do it on my own. And I think it almost hurts you in the long run because then you're not open almost to learn, really. All right, really quick. So the reason I drew this bear kid was I wanted to have just a very subtle difference in the expression, but they're wearing the exact same thing. So immediately you're thinking, well, they're wearing a bear costume. They're probably happy. They're carefree, whatever. You can see on the left side, it just doesn't read happy. It's like slightly like mischievous. So there's a huge difference with just subtleties that can make the difference. So even sometimes what they are wearing can be ironic or irrelevant to the character's actual personality, but you want to do your best to make them fit. So if I drew a character that was wearing a bear costume, it would either be because they think they're really cool and that's trendy at the moment, or they're really just like a happy kid wearing their bear pajamas.
What do you think of hot dog costumes?
um, no quick pun came to my mind quickly. So hot dog.
Whoever's wearing one of those is sure as a wiener.
There you go. There you go.
Michael wants to know, could you do a leather fur jacket?
A leather fur jacket. Yeah. And give me another question to answer while I'm doing this leather fur jacket.
All right. I heard recently that drawing pose drawings isn't quite as interesting as there being a story that you can see in the drawing. Can they not be one and the same? How do you work a story into concept sketches pose studies?
I think the difference is what you're trying to say is the difference between an illustration and concept art. Usually, like this is considered concept art. The red drawing is considered illustration. So there is a difference. And I think for you, if you're trying to just do like standard posing, the way that the character is posed, even in concept art, can still tell a story about the character. Probably, actually, usually not nearly as much as an illustration piece does, because then you can put them in an environment, you can really go dynamic, you can have different lighting scenarios, whatever. So they can be one and the same, but more in the sense of the way that the character is standing and the impression, the presence that they're giving off can tell the story of the character.
I like this question. Hey, I was wondering for my animation program beginning in the fall, we need to learn how to create anthropomorphic characters as well as human and animal characters separately. I'm pretty terrified to create nice looking anthro characters. Any advice?
Well, to be honest, I've never actually drawn an anthropomorphic character. Usually, from what I know, I'm not like super familiar with that area, but the proportions are usually more human, where the head and the texture of the character is more animal. So I guess let me reread the second part of that. I think the best thing you could do is learn how to draw human characters first, then animal, or either or, but then learn to draw each separately so that when you draw them together, you can pull from what you've learned about how to draw each. And I guess how to make it look nice looking, just have it smile without it reading creepy.
without, without it making it look like it's from Five Nights at Freddy's.
Exactly.
Benedict asks, do you think Mickey Mouse is a great concept? It is simple but recognizable beyond measure. Is recognizability important, or does it have to just look cool?
Yes, I think Mickey Mouse is a great character because that silhouette. And actually, maybe I'll do that with this leather jacket thing here. So I guess this kind of goes down the line of, is your character distinguishable enough? So Mickey Mouse is the most obvious reason to recognize is if when you make Mickey Mouse's character just a pure silhouette, those ears could tell you exactly who the character is. I forgot, which video was I watching? I was watching a tutorial recently on the power of silhouettes, and one of them talked about how if your character reads well and you can get a good idea of the character itself just from the silhouette, you've designed an awesome character without even having to draw it out yet. So purely based on the silhouette. So like even this fur jacket that I'm doing right now, I will not have a strong silhouette at the current stage that I have it at because the pose is generic, the material and what I'm doing to it is very generic. But let's say we gave this character these two legs that come out of the coat. We'll make the coat thicker. The arms go out. Then you can start to think of like, oh, maybe the fur on the jacket has some extras, like some feathers or whatever excessive stuff might be on there. Let me make this smaller here. We'll give her some high boots. So now you're starting to look at the character and you're starting to make your own story of who this character is. So someone that might be a little more gaudy, if they're wearing such like a huge jacket like this with all this extra material and whatever on it. And let's say we have her arm out instead of in, and she let me make this her hand and she's smoking or something. Something like that definitely reads more into who the character is than if I just have her hands on her hips. Or even, now I'm just getting weird with this character. Actually, no, I won't go too far with this one. But then, obviously, if you added anything like a silhouette, let's say like a katana or something crazy, like that immediately tells you, okay, well, she's a fighter. She's someone that kills people, or she has a weapon for some reason that makes sense to her. And I guess that this type of a character would be more recognizable than what I was working on before, where it was more standard concept art pose, and I wasn't really giving thought into who the character was. I was just wanting to create a fur leather jacket. And that's the different mindset that you have to switch between when you're a character artist. You have to push yourself beyond what's expected.
Does the katana have like a Mickey Mouse chain on it?
Yes, I could totally do that. Although this totally makes me think Kingdom Hearts. They have the Mickey Mouse chain. So either she's ironic or she has a deep obsession over Disney. Or
Or
Kingdom
both.
Hearts. Or both.
Fabian asks, when creating a character, is it important to set them apart from the rest of the characters and make them really outstanding?
Yes. Let me think. I have a... I'm going to quickly find a lineup because I often thought about that myself when I was creating my own characters. Are these distinguishable enough from each other? Where did I put that? Yes, I think you should, when you're creating a bunch of characters that are supposed to be closely related in some way, I think the best thing you can do is put them side by side and silhouette them out. And if you're not able to distinguish one from the next, that's a problem. That means that you don't have enough traits about the character or their wardrobe that make them distinctly stand out from the rest of the group. Let me see if I can find. Okay, oh, this is an old one, but this will work for the sake of argument. All right, so here's just a quick look at these 10 characters, and when I silhouette them out, I'm able to distinguish them because I created them. But I need to pull it in front of someone that has no idea who these characters are or what these are supposed to represent, and then ask them which, or like get general feedback on which ones stood out to them, which ones seemed to be stronger than other ones, and then ask them why. So it's good not only to make them stand out, but have it make sense. And the biggest thing, I think, is to make it make sense in that world. So everything that I'm adding to the characters, I want to make sure it makes sense in the world. So like, if this world didn't have that much magic, because there really isn't magic, there's no dragons, it wouldn't make sense for me to implement or integrate things that might be magical or things that have like dragon armor or dragon emblems or something, unless if that was the mascot of something, where you really want to make sure that they're relating to each other. And the best thing is like the guy with the shovel, you can assume, okay, well, he has a shovel, so he either works somewhere where there's a physical labor job, or like immediately you could go farm, or if you thought more like beyond that, he could be like a grave digger or something, where a shovel itself can intrigue someone's mind into what it might represent. So yes, I think it's important to set them apart from the rest of the characters, but also having a feeling of relatability between them. So that would be my answer for that.
There was a really good question, and I don't know where it went. I hate that.
You can find it.
I'm looking. Um. Oh, the one question wasn't about weight of a character, it was so much of like how do you make the character feel like it's throwing its weight around. So like when you like thrust a sword or slam a hammer.
Oh, is that what they said?
Yeah.
The best way I would recommend is getting reference, because sometimes what we think would look accurate about doing action poses or poses that are more dynamic can actually look very stiff and unsettling if you do it without reference. Sometimes it will look right, but most of the time when I see artists that do dynamic poses, they don't really think of the pose and how the character is doing that action. The best example I can think of is someone called me out in school because I had a character. I think, what were they holding? They were holding a weapon over their shoulder, and I had the weapon going like perfectly horizontal to the viewer, and it was more of an aesthetic reasoning, and I didn't really like think of it making sense or whether or not it made sense. Here was the head. Shoulder. So something like this. So then this guy was like, Tim, I'm telling you that looks wrong. And I was like, what? What? Like, I don't understand where you're coming from. And he was like, okay, stand up. And he gave me, I think it was a broom because I was working in the library, and he made me hold it. And for me to position this broom so that it read horizontal to the viewer, I had to like really strain my arm, and my arm was like pulled back behind my body itself, and it felt really uncomfortable and unnatural. So then when I looked at my character again, I was like, that does not make sense. The sword would not be facing like that with that arm position like that. It would be more down, and it would get smaller because it's not perfectly horizontal with the angle of the viewer. So my best advice with doing stuff like that is, one, do reference, but the other thing is just to do it yourself. And with the character that I had that was holding the shovel, I literally took a picture of myself holding a shovel and then putting my foot on one of the ends of it. Because even subtleties like how far up do you put the knee when the foot isn't at like a full 90 degree, it's like standing on something that's like, 10 inches off the ground. Like how does the fabric respond to that? Always use reference. I think this just comes down to the idea of always use reference because you'll get a more accurate depiction of what you're trying to create.
Yeah, it reminds me of like people, depending on if your character is like like if they're very combatant, like if they understand like martial arts or not, because if you know in Game of Thrones, remember when Theon Greyjoy tries to chop off the one dude's head in the keep,
I
Spoiler
wouldn't say
alert, sorry.
yes.
But like you know how like it gets stuck in his head and then he can't pull it out and so he's like just trying to chop off this dude's head but he can't and there's so much weight, but it's such a good reference of being like that's how much weight there needs to have or how sharp the blade needs to be in order to cut through something, or stab through something.
Yeah.
uh, I need to find that question. It's going to bother me. I'll just ask this question first. Do you have any suggestions on how to take a widely agreed upon creature design, like Western dragons, and like somehow giving them more visual dynamic anatomy and yet still keeping them identifiable?
I think of that. I think of like How to Train Your Dragon because I think I watched their like sub documentary that was included in the DVD on how to take the dragon concept and make it unique. And I actually think they did a really good job in making him unique. I don't think those dragons look cool, or I don't think they look like something I'd be like, yeah, that looks badass. I mean, Tooth looks pretty good, but like the other dragons are just very, they're bulbous, they're strangely shaped, but they definitely took a widely agreed design like what you're asking, and they gave it something that was uniquely them. So sometimes you have to play with taking those designs and then incorporating what might not be, I guess, attractive is the right word. Where I would look at those dragons and I'd be like, yeah, man, I'm not digging it. But I can at least appreciate that those looked like original designs that were obviously based upon the dragon design. So for you, if you're thinking the Western dragon, so if you're not thinking like the Asian culture dragon, the Western one, which is very reptilian, and you want to take, well, if you want to do something that is similar to a Western dragon, but you want to make it your own, then you should be influenced by reptiles, but maybe do a reptile that isn't as widely known. So like just type in Google image search, be like obscure reptiles or absurd reptiles or something, and get in, and hopefully you'll find some cool reference of a reptile that is like almost abstract, and then you'll be able to pull different elements of that creature into making your own based on what you already know about what a Western dragon should look like.
I found the question.
Uh,
It's from Serenity Moonshadow. It says, how difficult do you find it to pick the right amount of details for a character Is the saying less is more sometimes more recommendable than putting more detail into a design and risking of overloading it?
Yes. I was going to make a tutorial on this last night because Joe suggested it on that last 20% of an image, sometimes even the last 10%, can take like 90% of the total percentage of time that you worked on the piece. That's because you get so caught up in the minor detailing and the rendering that you actually lose focus on what's important, which is, are the shapes strong? Do they read well? Do the colors work in harmony with each other? Are the values accurate? And sometimes if you catch yourself in a moment of over-rendering, then you really need to take a step back and be like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I looking at a piece that could have been called done, but I feel the need to push it that much further? And sometimes it comes from a place of not being satisfied with the level of quality you hit with that piece, and you want to make it better, but sometimes the foundation might not be at that same level of your rendering quality. And it can get frustrating, definitely. But I definitely think less is more is a great way to start off your thinking with. Like if you're an artist just starting out, I definitely want you to have the mindset of less is more. And what was it? I forget what artist it was what I was watching, but they made a video on every artist is born with 10,000 crappy drawings that they're born with. And the sooner that they get rid of the 10,000, or as soon as they get rid of the 10,000, that's when they start producing great work. And that's why the whole perception of an artist is born with the talent versus someone that's trained with the talent, that's kind of how I see it too, where people that are perceived as being born with a natural talent, well, they started at a younger age. So they started their 10,000 crappy drawings at age 5 versus someone that started when they're 17. So that kid, even though they're not as mentally strong as the artist at 17, their physical ability to draw, I honestly would believe, is better than the person that starts at 17 if that kid was like, let's say he grew up to be 14, because then he has 9 years of experience, even though it might not be perceived as like real experience, but they still drew a bunch and they got a lot of that crap out so that they were able to progress as an artist. So I definitely think less is more. Keep pushing out those crappy drawings until you can get to the drawings you feel proud of and you're happy showing them to other people.
People are asking, I've seen several questions about wrinkles in clothing.
Yes, actually, let me find, because there was actually a tutorial I did on this. It was one of those like widely requested ones. So you can find it on CG Cookie or Concept Cookie right now, and it pretty much talks about, in my mind, there's 3 types of wrinkles. There's a hanging wrinkle. Let me zoom in so it's easier to see. Which is also a relaxed, a tension wrinkle, and a compressed wrinkle. So in every fabric that's ever either laid on a body or in an environment, they're composed of these 3 different wrinkles. So in this example, I showcase in green like what's a relaxed wrinkle, what are stretched wrinkles, and what are compressed wrinkles. And now, yeah, that might be easier to see on a piece of fabric that's hanged on a pin or something, but you can apply that same theory to clothing. So like on jeans, wrinkles on the side are usually tension or stretched wrinkles. The ones that are near the knee or near the ankle are usually compressed. And the wrinkles that are kind of in between, or like if the pants themselves are not like skinny jeans, they're more relaxed or fit jeans, then that's where you'll see some hanging wrinkles, because they're not wrinkles based on tension or they're not being pushed against each other, but rather they're just excess clothing that is forming a wrinkle.
We're hitting about the 10-minute mark.
We got 10 minutes left, so if you guys have any last minute questions, feel free to ask them now.
Oh, there are tons of questions.
Oh, Well, then we will try to get through as many as we can in the last section here.
Lily asks, how do you make your characters' faces look unique? I find that all my faces tend to look the same, perhaps because my visual library is lacking. I like drawing goblin faces and I can be really crazy with them, but my humans always look the same.
I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, to be honest. Where I definitely noticed the way I draw faces is very similar, and that's why my faces tend to look very similar. But look at all the artists that you think of that you might look up to, like Zeronis, or in my case, I like Zeronis and Tetsuya Nomura or Akihisa or Kimohora, and all of them have very similar, or even, well, I could just start listing off my favorite artists, but all of them draw faces almost the exact same for every character. And it's because I'm not so much looking at the way they're drawing their faces, because I already established myself. I like the way they proportioned the different features and how they draw them and whether they're softer or whatever it might be. But I'm looking at the different characters based on their wardrobe or their design, their attitude, their presence that they're giving off of. So I think the only problem would be if you're drawing human faces and you want them to look more human and less goblin, because then yeah, that does kind of fall more under a problem rather than a advantage. But if you want subtleties in the differences of your faces, that's what you should aim for. So your female and male characters should have enough distinctions to give the impression of male and female. But if they have like a similar structure to their eyes, or if the way you draw your noses are similar, I actually don't see that as a bad thing.
That kind of there's the argument of style versus uh, like lack of understanding of racial, like cultural stuff, right? Like ethnicities and whatnot.
In a sense of like them still looking the same.
Yeah, like there's a difference between one understanding like what an African American nose looks like in comparison to uh like a Caucasian nose, and just not being able to understand that, I guess, like not study it.
Oh, that way, yeah. Where it definitely does come down to like those subtleties. But then you also borderline on you don't want it to come across as racist either. Where I know a few years ago I got in trouble because I drew a nose that was larger. It was on that nose sheet, and my version of a wide nose was of a black nose, and I didn't think anything of it being racist because that's the reference that I was using. So I definitely think there needs to be a realistic look at the differences in facial features across ethnicities and gender, and you want to establish them, but you obviously don't want to poke fun at them. And I think it comes down to what was your intention behind it. Where if you were doing it to distinguish it as a character, then that's how it should be. But if you're really doing it to poke fun at the differences in the facial features, that's when it becomes kind of like a no-no zone.
The what was interesting is I was watching a commercial the other day, and what the actress in the commercial, she looked so interesting because she looked like she was a mix of just so many different uh like races. It was really cool. Like, have you seen there's a picture online of like in 50 or 70 years from now what people are gonna look like because of all of the mixing.
No, I haven't seen that.
I am not asks, in what ways could you use color to give more of an impact to your character design? Not just in visual, but emotional story wise too.
That's a good question. Uh, did I delete? Okay, so quick answer is yes, absolutely. You can use color for your character design. Oh man, if I had it still open. Because there's two of my characters that I really feel are heavily focused on the colors that they choose. One of them, they wear red pants. What are the stigmas of someone wearing red pants that you usually see? And I definitely wanted that to reflect on who he was as a character. And the other character was someone that wore like all neutral. and it was supposed to kind of convey the fact that they are very simple, that they're not as rebellious, they're very grounded, and using earth tone colors that are desaturated gives that feel to it. Whereas another character I have there, it's this vibrant colors. It's very out there, and she is a very outgoing, vivacious character. So to have that reflect in the colors is definitely something I wanted to do. So yes, I definitely believe that you can use colors to give more of an impact to your character design. Let's say 3 more questions, and then we're going to cut off the stream.
When I design armor, I want to make it aesthetically pleasing, but the functionality of the armor gets in the way sometimes. How can I combine both and still make the design intriguing?
That's very true. There's another thing. I got called out in college because I didn't really have a solid understanding of armor, and it was one of those things where I had a chest plate, but when he would bend over, the chest plate would be digging into his stomach, and I didn't even think about that because it wasn't something that was on my mind while I was creating it. So yes, you want to make the armor that is functional and makes sense, because there are people that like study armor and that's what they're really into, and they will call you out. And the more research you do on it, the better chances you'll have of creating something that feels accurate. So how do you combine both? Usually it's in like the finer details of the armor. So the way that, like, where's my, I think I still have that up. Yeah. So making sure that the foundation of the armor is solid, so like the chest plate and the shoulder guards, whatever, like they make sense if the character is moving around. And even imagine the armor on yourself. Really think about if you were holding your arms all the way up, like how would the armor be like poking the side of your face? Like that's a problem. Things like that. And then to make it intriguing is to have like these little designs on the armor itself. So those intricacies are usually what gives the visual appeal while still having the strength and the look of armor.
Yeah, definitely study functionality too. Like understanding where that, like underneath the sleeve, like the shoulder guard. I know a lot of people just draw like a giant D for a shoulder pad, you know? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And so they don't acknowledge the fact that underneath the shoulder pad there is usually cloth, so that way there's a free form in the shoulder maneuverability and the rotation. But if you have a giant shoulder pad on your arm, you shouldn't be able to rotate your arm all the way because of the shoulder pad would click into maybe the chest, like the breastplate, you know,
Yeah.
which is why I love the Man of Steel designs, the Kryptonian armor, because if you look at the close detail that they did on like the bicep, even the bicep where the bicep bends, there's like a gap to show the functionality in there. It's so good. A lot of people are asking about draping clothing, but we already kind of went over that, right?
Yeah. And if you really are curious about fabric or wrinkles in general, I did a full tutorial on it, so you can check that out on CG Cookie, Concept Cookie.
Do you want to scroll through and
Yeah.
pick one out that you
Well,
want?
I'm going to look for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see here. I like this one. How important do you think complementary or contrasting textures are in an outfit design? I think it's actually better to have complementing textures, because if you have like metal and fur and leather and velvet and silk, if you try to throw all of them in at once, it becomes too much. And I think limiting it down to a few definitely is a stronger palette than if you try to include a bunch of different ones. Hmm. Someone's asking, when I'm coloring my drawing, my characters always end up looking like a plastic doll. How can I make them look more human and less like a doll? A few things. Definitely the way that plastic is interpreted from a viewer is the way that you light it. So if you have a lot of like intense highlights, it doesn't actually read as skin unless if the skin was like wet or had like just came out of the water or sweating or something. So keep your skin colors more neutral and then have the subtleties of like the curves and the shadows or whatever. Have those read stronger than pushing highlights because that can read it, make it look more plastic. But then also the way that you are coloring the face, you probably don't have enough nuances where it's way too smooth. You want to look at a face and don't use like model references because often those are photoshopped so much that they erase all the nuances. So look at a real face, maybe even your own face, and look at how some of the edges and curves on the face are depicted. So like even the areas around your jawline or your cheekbones or the area around your mouth, the smile lines, the way the nose and the eyes seem to have some layers in between them as well. And if you capture those, you'll definitely capture more of a realistic look. Yes, Benedict, no stream is safe from your curiosity. All right, the last question I'm going to answer is, how do you figure out what clothing to give your characters? I tried looking up things like modern fashions, but it didn't seem to help. What would you do to figure out what clothes to give your characters? All right, so this kind of incorporates all that we just talked about in this stream, where to create a solid character that is more in depth than just the surface value, you want to make them feel real. So if you're having trouble thinking of what clothing to add to your character, well, one, what environment are you kind of deciding to place this character in? Because there's a huge difference of placing them in a forest than near a waterfall, and you want to make sure that they're wearing appropriate clothing for the situation around them. Make them feel real. So give them personality. Have things on them that are specifically them, and it might be the sun or the goggles that they're wearing, or it might be a tattoo that they have. Something that definitely makes them feel like it was their decision to have this on the wardrobe, even though it serves no function. Um, which leads into the personalities reflecting in the wardrobe. So an extroverted person might have more vibrant clothing than someone more introverted, which might be more reserved, laid back, or neutral. And then lastly, going back to how are they raised, their morality. So the typical anime, both their parents are dead. And how does that reflect into their character's mood, which ultimately reflects into what they're wearing? Or maybe they're more normal in the sense of they had a normal upbringing, but they had siblings that had a heavy influence on them, and maybe a character wears something that was passed down from her older sister or his older brother, and it's very sacred to them. It might even just be like a necklace or something. But even little traits like that add so much value to the overall perception of the character. So I want you to really feel like these characters are real, and you need to step into their shoes as well as look at how other people perceive them as well. Other people meaning other people in the story itself. Okay, so that was our stream on Character Design 101. I hope you guys were able to maybe pick up some things for when you're drawing your own characters, and we'll have our next stream next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, -5 GMT. And usually the topic will be posted about an hour or two beforehand. Today we were actually on schedule. I posted it earlier. We have a lot of tutorials being recorded right now, so stay tuned for what we have planned. There should be a third-party tutorial coming out in the next, well, I don't want to confirm it, but it should be in the next few days. And I'm not only re-recording some of the basic tutorials, but I'm also going to be recording tutorials that are more like lectures of like overcoming, what were the ones that I was talking about earlier, Joe?
Pressure.
Oh yeah, dealing with pressure, overcoming frustration, and how to push through that final 10%. So I think those are helpful because I think a lot of what art is very mental, and yeah, there's a physical trait in actually drawing it, but the way you go about treating your drawings and the way you are you're able to become a problem solver, I think that's so important in becoming a really solid digital artist. All right, so I want to thank you guys again for coming to the stream, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks again for the good question, guys, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
There you go.
I was going to say also do exercise 38. Boom.
Oh yeah, exercise 38, we'll have the results on Friday. And next week we'll probably do something that's more... actually, no, I'll keep it a secret. We'll wait until Monday to reveal what we're doing for the next exercise.
I like secrets. Now I'm intrigued. All right.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.